Hi,
Michael, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Nick?
I'm okay. I've been slow to respond because I'm actually on holiday with my children in a holiday house.
Oh no,
They
I'm
might
sorry
run.
about that. Sorry about
Oh, that's
that.
okay. This work's important. So some people might run past you from time to time. That's all I got to tell you.
That's fine. Where are you?
In Cessnock in the Hunter Valley, which is just northwest of Sydney.
Thank you so much for doing this. I
Oh,
appreciate it. I'm grateful. Um, I didn't think you would, so I was
of
glad
course I
you
would.
did.
There's no
Let's
reason for me.
just we can just
There's no
hit the
reason for
reset
me not to conduct an
button.
interview.
What's that?
There is never a good reason not to conduct an interview.
That's the right spirit.
Okay. Um, So I suppose the questions that I sent to you originally in that email were specific to not just book, but more to the apology that you published.
That's fine. I'm happy to answer any question you want. Any question you ask is fine.
Well,
I've even got the book here. You may, if you ask about a specific thing, I'm going to look it up and make sure I remember it just right to get it just right for
sure.
you.
So the reason why I was prompted to contact you is because, like anyone who reads in this field, your views run against most of those of most of my sources. So the main one, I suppose, that caught my attention was uh, climate change is not making natural disasters worse. And everywhere I look and everywhere I try and approach it from your perspective, I find it a confounding thing for you to assert. So let's go into that.
Okay. Should I say something or do you want to ask us a more specific question?
No. Why don't you jump in? And
Yeah. Yeah. So the IPCC, United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, defines disasters very specifically. It's not talking about weather events. It's talking about the impact of weather extremes, weather events on people and property. It's very, very clear about this in the IPCC in their definitions. And what we know is that deaths from natural disasters have declined 90% over the last 100 years. They've declined 80% over the last 40 years. They've declined during a period of significant population growth. So the population has quadrupled since over the last 100 years. So that 90% decline is even larger than it may seem. Now, in terms of
so,
property, sorry, go ahead.
can I interrupt for a second there?
Of
So,
course.
though you didn't say that in the piece you just said, it's not making disasters worse, but you're going by the IPCC definition. So, correct me if I'm wrong. So, that is to say, you're not asserting that disasters are becoming more common and more intense, or weather-related disasters are becoming more common or more intense, but that their impact on communities is not. Is that the difference?
The difference is, okay, and this is very important. A hurricane is not a disaster. A hurricane by itself is not a disaster. If a hurricane doesn't hurt anybody, if it doesn't hurt anybody, it doesn't kill anybody, if it doesn't hit landfall or whatever, or doesn't cause any damage, it's not a disaster. It's only a disaster when it kills people or destroys property. That's how the IPCC defines it. Now, in my arguments with climate feedback and others on Twitter the last few days, some people say things, they do this, they go, Michael says that climate change is not increasing natural disasters. He's wrong. Look at these weather extremes.
Mm.
Look at these extreme weather events, and they say things like increasing severity of some hurricanes, longer fire season, all of which is in this very long, thick 400-page book in great detail. And in what I'll underscore one thing, every single scientific claim I made for this book, I made before publishing the book as it relates to climate change, and the scientists reviewed it. So on each of these things, they've all seen it, they've all reviewed it. This is very well understood. Now, in terms of property damage,
But we still
yeah,
haven't, to my satisfaction, we haven't cleared that up. So
okay.
you're not asserting that the more extreme weather events are not happening, are not to some extent related to anthropogenic climate change. You're asserting that their impact on communities is decreasing.
Definitely,
Okay, but
without
the latter is
question.
correct. Anthropogenic climate change is generating more extremes in weather, some of which are defined by some, if not the IPCC, as disasters.
Again, they're only disasters when they cause.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that point.
I think you said what I think. So in terms of costs.
So you accept that there is more extreme weather because of climate change?
Yeah, on basically on my critics and the people that I'm arguing with on Twitter and elsewhere, when they cite cases of, say, more intense hurricanes, longer fire season, more heat waves, yes, 100%, because they're just drawing on the same science. I am totally agree.
Okay.
That's not the same thing as disasters, and it's really important because disasters are not extreme weather events. So in other words, I think one question that people have is, do we expect this long decline in deaths to reverse itself? That's what you would worry about, right? So let's say we got more severe hurricanes. Is it going to reverse itself? Because I think that's what everybody wants to know, right? The friends of my daughter, whatever. It's hard to see a scenario where that number reverses itself in some significant way. In other words, the difference in terms of disaster preparedness and infrastructure is huge compared to the intensity of the increase of these different weather events or extreme events. So, for example, you think
an overreaction due to climate alarmism?
What's that?
And do you think that the amount of resources we're putting into this is an overreaction in part due to climate alarmism?
I've never said that.
Okay.
That's not my view.
Okay.
I think too much money is being put into renewables, but that's because I think renewables are a terrible source of energy. That's not because it's not a money thing. But I'm not arguing that. I'm not. It's easy, I think, to see me saying these different things and then kind of want to map onto me things that other people that you might imagine.
Could be the case, yeah.
So, so just to kind of finish the point, I mean, these big declines in deaths from, say, cyclones in Bangladesh or the South Indian Sea, these are reductions mostly from better weather prediction and some storm shelters. Well, do we think cyclones are going to be so much more intense that they wipe out those significant declines in deaths? Hard to see it. I mean, that's not to say we shouldn't worry about climate change. I think we should. It's not to say that we shouldn't do anything about climate change. I think we should. But I think that people have to understand, climate change is not increasing natural disasters because natural disasters are not getting worse. They're getting better in the sense of more lives are being saved. Now, in terms of cost, when you normalize the cost, there's no trend, especially on the two big ones, hurricanes and floods, but certainly with all of them, there's no trend.
So when I put this, because I've seen your exchange with climate feedback, when I put this to a couple of sources in Australia, they said, look, focusing on the definition by the IPCC to defend this position, these are my words, not my sources, but the implication I took from it is they found it to be intellectually dishonest.
Why? They rely on the IPCC's definition as intellectually dishonest. Why?
No, just focusing on the definition, because they pointed out that the IPCC uses a definition. Different institutions around the world use different definitions. The governor of Florida uses a definition. The governments of New South Wales and Australia use different definitions. So to focus on this to assert that there are less disasters or fewer disasters is misleading. It's certainly misleading to readers of the Australian, because they saw you say natural disasters are getting worse. The implication of that, surely you can see that the implication to a reader of that is that it is your assertion that there are fewer extreme weather events.
No, absolutely not. That's just, I'm sorry, but you make it sound like some semantic thing. There's a difference between a hurricane and a disaster.
Many of your readers that I have spoken to view it as a semantic argument on your behalf.
I mean, that's bizarre to me. In other words, here's these people accusing me of actually saying something different than the IPCC. And here I say, here's what the IPCC says. And they go, he's being semantic.
You said natural disasters are not getting worse due to climate change. Yeah. And by any scientific measure, they are. But you're drawing a
I'm sorry, but what scientific measure is disaster getting worse? Which one?
I spent the morning reading them, and I was determined not to get into my pile of papers next to yours. But it is not hard to find any measure, as you would know better than me. In the past couple of years, Miles Allens has led this new science of attributing
Hmm.
individual or more narrow casting impacts of climate change and disasters. This is not, it's not a couple of people here.
Sorry, no. First of all, you just conflated extreme weather with disasters. So you're just doing it right there. So yes, I'm not
I think that is
actually
a
bringing any fault with those attribution studies. I accept the attribution studies, and in
right.
fact, in my book, I go into great detail. In fact, I mean that's the whole point. Is I'm kind of like actually the chapter, one of the headline, one of the section descriptions is a small part of bigger problems, I think is what it's called. But basically, it's not to say climate change isn't happening. It's not to say that climate change isn't making some weather events more extreme. I think it is. It is to say that it's not making disasters worse. How could it? Because disasters are not getting worse. Disasters are getting better. There's fewer
Right.
deaths and no increase in damage. How can that not be anything other than we should be hallelujahing
Well,
the few
we
people
should
that
be.
die of disasters every year?
We should, but I looked at, and obviously I was drawn to areas I was slightly more familiar with, and I have very little of your expertise. So I looked at your sections on the most recent Australian bushfires.
Right.
So you say that the 2020 fires burned half as much as the 2002 fires. I checked those figures, and the figures that I can see, the published figures in Australia, are that in 2020, 18 million hectares burned, and in 2002, 21 million. So half is just not correct. You also cite how few people died.
Are you going to let me respond or no?
So pardon me, go on.
All right, I'm going to find the source. All right, so our sources are Ellis et al., National Inquiry on Bushfire Mitigation and Management, University of Wollongong Research or online. The final report summary, Victorian Brushfires Royal Commission, Black Friday Bushfires, Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience.
All right, I've got homework to do that and to check them and see where the discrepancy is.
Yeah.
It's possible I'm wrong. It's possible you are. It's possible they are.
I'm actually fine, by the way, that stuff I'm actually fine to do over email if you want. That's totally fine.
Okay, good. And on that, but I was just looking at the emphasis that you put on certain facts, which is fine for someone engaged in a debate. That's absolutely fine. But I found some bits that I disagreed with, having just watched most of the Royal Commission into the bushfires. You noted the number of deaths, and they were thankfully very low. I think you said 3 or 4. I have got no problem with that figure. What I found remarkable, though, is that that doesn't count the 400 deaths that have been attributed to the pall of smoke that lingered over Australian cities. And that number is expected to rise. And this, again, it might be data you're not yet aware of because it came up in the Royal Commission. And it doesn't, and it almost dismisses, I think. You say that there's an undue focus on that smoke, or perhaps an hysteria. I don't know if that was the word you used, but that was how I read it among Australian media, as a result of the smoke that lingered over populated areas. But I would say that that smoke had a real impact on people's lives, and we know it had a real impact on deaths. To me, they're really significant things to sort of shoot past. And I think it is to underestimate. I think it is to underestimate the impact of the fires. I don't think it's necessarily deliberate, but I think that's the result.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you what I want to say about it.
Sure.
I don't want to do that. First of all, in fact, much of this book is a criticism of wood burning for the smoke impacts on people's lives. I cite the deaths from burning and breathing smoke, so I'm not minimizing it. I also live in California, and we had a very bad smoky fire season, and we don't like it. Here's one thing I will say, though, that I think is important here. One of the reasons for the failure to burn up the underbrush or the wood fuel that accumulates in managed forests, the post-European forests, is because the locals don't like all the smoke, and I appreciate it. I don't want smoke. Like when one of our neighbors here in our natural gas burning neighborhood burns wood, everyone's like, "What are you doing? You're burning wood. It's terrible." So I don't want to do that. But I do want to just kind of note, like, you might be in a situation too where you're actually doing what we need to do, or what you guys need to do to burn up that wood fuel, and you still have smoke, and it really and it could kill people and it could harm people. I mean, it's challenging to measure specific events like that, but I don't mean to do that. And look, we did go through the fatalities. if I felt like there was some good study, and maybe you have it, that tries to attribute the number of deaths from those fires, I think it's tricky again because you'd have to somehow calculate how many more deaths that is from that smoke
Yeah,
inhalation than
I'm
it
happy
would
to
be
send
if you
you a
were
link to that.
properly managing
It's
burns.
it's some interesting new work, and I'll happily flick it to you.
Okay.
There's also very good science in Australia suggesting that the buildup of wood is not the cause of these, of the increasing scale and intensity of these fires. The person I'd cite there is Lindenmayer, who I'm happy to send to you.
Okay.
Um,
I cite one scientist estimates there's 10 times more wood fuel in Australia's forests today than when Europeans arrived. The main reason is that the government of Australia, as in California, refused to control burns for both environmental and
yeah,
human health reasons. As such, fires would have occurred even had Australia's climate not warmed. That's David Packham, interviewed by Andrew Bolt late last year. Is David Packham someone you
I don't
respect?
know David Packham. I do know Andrew Bolt, and I know he has very strong views on these issues. They're
Yeah.
views that are rejected by every emergency service and government in the country, who say, in fact, we do keep up with hazard reduction burns, and we do support hazard reduction burns. They're getting harder to conduct safely in a hotter, drier climate. And that's for obvious reasons. You know, they've got a short window during the middle of the year where they can conduct these burns in Australia safely, and that window is shrinking. There is no government that I am aware of, and there is no agency of a government that I'm aware of that advocates against hazard reduction burning. But it is a view of some people that somehow green activists have infected the policymaking process.
That's not
But
what
there's
I'm
been,
claiming. I mean,
it's not what you're saying at all,
no.
but it is part of the broader debate. And I wouldn't pretend for a second that you'd said that. More broadly, what about the response from climate feedback? Are you concerned that a researcher and six, from my reading of it, reasonably prominent and qualified academics have come out to respond to your piece like that?
Oh no, I'm delighted because they just absolutely, I mean, it was embarrassing for them. I mean, they're endorsing the sixth mass extinction claim. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, wow. I mean, so, and also the author that
I
they
haven't done enough reading to
claim,
discuss mass extinction.
yeah. I mean, but I'll just say, you kind of go, wow, they're so impressive scientists. Well, that scientist that makes that claim was considered to be used in the IPBES review, which came out last year. And I interviewed the co-chair of IPBES, and they specifically rejected it because we're not in a sixth mass extinction. So I think that's, I mean, that's that. And then the other issue is the disasters. And that issue is just, they're using, what they're doing consistently is they're actually saying, Michael's wrong by saying that climate change isn't making natural disasters worse. Look at these extreme weather events. I mean, you've got to admit, Nick, that's misleading to do that.
Well, no, I do take their point of view and the point of view of others that have been put to me, that in fact, to make the assertion in a newspaper in particular, without context, that climate change is not making natural disasters worse.
It's true. How could it?
You then in your conversation with me say, but you say to me, but in conversation, and you put it out in your book that you are using the language the way the IPCC does, but it's not the way humans speak. I mean, if I was to say to somebody, natural disasters are getting better, the presumption is that I'm trying to assert that there were fewer bushfires, fewer droughts, fewer floods, less intense hurricanes, and that's clearly not true.
But Nick, I mean, seriously though, my critics should choose. Are they going to criticize me for not being true to the science? Or are they going to criticize me for being too true to the science and not true enough to what people believe? I mean, I wrote this book. I slaved on this thing with all the footnotes precisely so people could understand exactly what I was claiming. Every claim in that article is sourced back here. And yet, so if someone wants to criticize me for using the IPCC definition of disasters, boy, have at it. I'm happy to be criticized for that.
Well, they're arguing that it's a semantic change without difference.
But it makes it sound like but the suggestion that it's a distinction without a difference.
We've been through this. What about the other assertions raised in the climate feedback critique of your piece?
Well, let's go through. I mean, I'm happy to go through them. Do you want to just give me another one? I wrote a long response, as you probably saw.
I have seen the response, but I thought if there was any in particular you wanted to bring up.
Well, they're terrible. I mean, one of them, this guy suggests I got the whaling, the whale oil story wrong. It's hilarious because our
I
whale
thought you brought
chapter
the
is too
whale oil up,
late.
didn't you?
What's that?
I wouldn't argue with that, but I thought you brought the whale oil up.
Yeah, but he sort of suggested that I was wrong about it. Of course, he didn't present any evidence, but he really, I mean, what happens is there's some arrogance here where these guys, they actually haven't done the research, but because they have PhDs and I'm just a journalist, they kind of go, well, I'm going to go and opine on stuff they've never even looked at. I mean, so, I mean, anything else you want to ask about? There was a renewables claim. The person claimed that solar and wind only require 3 to 5 times more land than natural gas or nuclear plants. Hilarious. Just go on Google Maps. You can draw around a power plant, any power plant in the world, solar, wind, nuclear, gas, whatever, just draw around it. And then you have the power density calculation. You just need to divide that into the amount of electricity it produces every year. And you can compare them. And what you'll find is it's always 2 orders of magnitude larger. For solar and wind farms, it's usually between 300 and 400 times. So to suggest it's 3 or 4 times is completely outside the mainstream. The book that, and one thing I did, Nick, in this book,
Did you not assert, though, that you'd need to use the entire planet's land surface area to...
I did not say that.
You didn't? Okay.
I did not say that. But I just want to make one quick point, which is that
Sure.
because I didn't want people, I wanted to be able to go out and talk to people like you and say, I am using either the best available peer-reviewed or the best available academic publishing or whatever, and not my own. We do all these calculations, these power density calculations on our own all the time. I relied on Václav Smil, who Bill Gates says is the person whose books he most waits for, is most respected. Václav Smil, by the way, I don't agree with Václav. He's a Malthusian. I love the guy, nice guy. But he's actually respected by liberals, conservatives, whatever, everybody. And I relied on...
I wouldn't argue with you about energy density and renewables. I mean, it's an obvious point. I wouldn't argue with you about energy density and renewables. It's an obvious point, but I'm not sure about the land size assertions. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are so interested in hydrogen, because of its potential density. But
I am with you on hydrogen. I'm agnostic of whether cars will be hydrogen or electricity, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. The common thread I get when I interview people about you and your work over the years, though, is that they say that you very select.
Years? Wow.
No, not my research. People who have been reading your work over.
Okay.
Not mine at all.
Yeah,
no, but they say that they find in your writing and in your arguments, you cherry pick data and you conflate, and that many of your assertions are true and many are not. And it appears to them as to be part of deliberate advocacy. Is that a reasonable criticism?
No, what that is psychological projection. That's what they're doing, and they're revealing it to you by projecting it onto me. And I gave you one example, the sleight of hand of mixing people up. It's the conflation. They're conflating extreme events and disasters. And it sounds like you want to let them off the hook. I don't want to. They should not be let off the hook.
I don't think that, as I said, I don't think people speak like that. I think to most people reading your piece, where you assert climate change is not making natural disasters worse, they would misunderstand what you're saying there. If you're saying that you're referring to the IPCC definition of disaster as its impact on communities, that is not how people would hear that sentence.
I don't agree, Nick, because look, when the media cover a disaster, they're covering a disaster. They're not covering the weather event. And when a hurricane doesn't touch ground, it makes some media coverage, but it doesn't make nearly as much media coverage when it touches down. So I think what's going on is that we've had the news media for 30 years suggesting that disasters are getting worse and that they're getting worse because of climate change. And I think that people have been misled badly. Wouldn't you agree? Because deaths are so far down. This is this incredible story. Death tolls have declined. I would suggest, let me ask you, if I went and interviewed your readers at Sydney Morning Herald and I was like, do you think that deaths from disasters have gone up or down over the last 40 years? What do you think they would say?
They'd probably say up, I would guess.
So whose fault is that?
Well, I'm not going to start attributing fault until I've researched the data.
But your job is to kind of educate the public about environmental issues, and they think that...
I know, which is why I conduct interviews like this. We're being diverted, I think, down a cul-de-sac here. You said I made a bunch of allegations against you. I simply didn't. I put questions to you based on interviews that I'd conducted, which is my job.
The question about the Robert Mercer, you're literally going to quote some guy just pulling shit out of his ass. And you can quote me, Will Steffen lying about me making shit up. Robert Mercer. I mean, it's kind of like this
The
is like
piece
some
isn't
way to
written.
tie me to Trump or something. It's ridiculous.
The
It's
piece is not
absurd.
written. You
He's
can't
just
criticize it.
making
It's
this up. I
not
mean, like
written.
literally, like you call him up and he goes, "What?" He goes, because he thinks everybody who disagrees with him is some Trump supporter, some right winger. I'm a long time
Well, he
progressive
didn't say
Democrat,
any of those things.
and he
I'm
goes,
not
"I
gonna.
think he might be getting funding from Mercer." What? Because what? Because you don't like me and you don't like Mercer? I mean, he's supposed to be a scientist and he's making an allegation that I'm taking money from one of Trump's main financiers, and I'm supposed to be just kind of like, oh yeah, no big deal, Nick, to be accused of kind of total bullshit like that.
No one has written a word about you here. It is perfectly normal to test ideas and test claims. And
Oh,
this is the
come on, Nick. I mean, that'd be like your whole line of questioning. Anyway, I'm not supposed to say it because it's the famous, you know. I mean, anyway, it doesn't. I said, I'm so happy that you're actually talking to me on a video conference and that we're having this. So I'm grateful. So I don't want to. Maybe you're mad at what I said to you, and if so, all I can ask
no,
is to move
not
on.
bad. I don't think you should be
But
in
you should feel
journalism
free,
unless
if this is the time for you to ask me any nasty question you want,
okay.
I will answer. I will answer any
Well,
question you want. You can ask me anything you want.
but the description of you as a nuclear lobbyist is false.
I'm not a lobbyist.
Right. Do you take any funding from anyone advocating for nuclear?
Absolutely not. Never have, never will. And I've suffered pretty significantly. If you would look at my budget, just so you know, most big environmental groups in the United States who take money directly from people that made their money in fossil fuels have budgets around 100 million a year. My budget is less than $1 million. And we've lost donors because we haven't towed the party line on a whole set of issues. So just to put some context in why, in other words, I've basically, the controversial positions I've taken over the last 15 years of my career, every time I've made a controversial position, I've lost donors, not for any financial reason, because they don't like the discomfort of disagreeing with environmentalists. And so then I go through that experience, and then my whole thing is like, everyone's like, so Michael, tell us who's the money you're taking from, whatever. I'm like, I put my donors, by the way, Climate Feedback does not list where their donors are from. It does not say who their board of directors is. There is no appeal process. I list my donors on my website. I've always done that, and I list the donors in the book. And so when people say, like, who are you taking your money from? I'm like, how much more do I have to do? Like, do you want me to put it in every tweet? It's in like the book and on the website on the about page. I mean, and if you actually were to research them, you would discover that 3 of them are billionaires. Like it's not like, I mean, and they could give me a lot more money if they wanted to. It's fine. But it's not. I mean, it's not like. I mean, I know philanthropy in the United States is totally supercharged. It's on steroids. But I mean, you have to understand these NGOs in the United States, because we have the inheritance tax traditionally, you know, that's why you have these big foundations and stuff. There's so much money for environmental advocacy when it fits the status quo view of 100% renewables and climate change is going to kill all of our kids. When you actually get out of that and you say something different, you actually get punished financially. That's what I wrote about in my article. I've had it happen to me more than once, twice to be specific. So becoming pro-nuclear was not a great, if I was looking to make a lot of money, that wouldn't have been what I would have chosen.
Okay, point taken. Was your way into this intellectually, was it nuclear? Was it your decision some years ago, which you've written about elsewhere, that you'd been misled about nuclear, and the way I understand it, that nuclear power was the fastest and best way for us to decarbonize the economy while providing enough power to sustain economies. Yes. Was that the door open for you into the rest of this?
No, I mean, it's really, there's a much longer history, maybe boring, over the last 15 years. I mean, I see this book as a bookend to this essay I wrote in 2004, I co-authored in 2004, called The Death of Environmentalism. And I would identify a couple of important phases. The first was with Death of Environmentalism and the new Apollo project that sort of inspired that essay. That was the original Green New Deal. It's the one that I lobbied I advocated the Obama team to do a big green stimulus.
That was nuclear focused itself, wasn't it?
No, I wasn't pro. I was coming slowly to pro-nuclear. 2009, I changed my mind because I was inspired by Stuart Brand, and I sat down and I read the World Health Organization reports on Chernobyl. And then we were just having a whole bunch of problems with renewables. And then there was a period of time where I was like, oh, we should have nuclear and renewables. And then you're kind of like, so if we have nuclear, do we need renewables? Well, obviously not, because France doesn't need renewables. If it's 75% nuclear, it doesn't need, in fact, when it added wind, it had to add gas so it could deal with these huge variations. And the carbon intensity of French electricity increased, which I note in the book. So the idea that you need renewables is entirely based on the idea that we should not or could not have nuclear. And then I said, this was 2010, I came out as pro-nuclear, which was great timing because Fukushima happened the next year. See, just a bid for popularity. And then I decided to campaign for nuclear in 2016 because nuclear plants were being closed, mostly for political reasons. You know, yes, there's cheap gas.
Were they not also aging by then?
No, well, I mean, they're obviously older than they were, but nuclear plants, first of all, the sites themselves are basically, for me, as someone that worries about climate change, I know you probably don't believe that, but as somebody that actually would like to
decarbonize. I believe that.
Okay.
Why would I not believe that?
Okay. All right. Sorry. I would like to decarbonize all of our energy. I would like to decarbonize all the world's energy. I think the fastest, cheapest, simplest way to do it is with nuclear energy, by far. Those plants, those sites are so hard. You can't get sites now to build nuclear plants in the United States. You just get too much opposition. So those sites, which often have like 1 or 2 reactors on them, could be places that could have 6 reactors, could produce hydrogen, could produce huge amounts of electricity, electrify the grid. So for me, saving those plants, and then you go, okay, how long can a nuclear plant operate? Well, in the United States, they just have announced that they can run for 80 years, you know, and then
that one that they made that announcement over for 80 years could be inundated by sea level rise far sooner than that. Surely that's a concern.
Well, I mean, what do you think? We're helpless to sea level rise? I mean, are you familiar?
I think it's something to think about when you're advocating an 80-year lifespan for a nuclear power plant.
No, I mean, look, I mean, have you been to Venice or Netherlands? I mean, you go to Venice and they have a huge seawall that floats up. I mean, the idea that we're sort of like, oh my God, 0.6 meters of sea level rise, we're helpless against that. I mean, come on, dude. Like, I mean, you can solve that problem. That's not a huge problem. And most places they're much farther above sea level than a half a meter. And look, all the parts in the nuclear plant can be replaced. Almost all of them. Steam generators, turbines. When you get to the reactor vessel itself, okay, some point you probably have to replace that reactor vessel. We don't know. It could be 80 years. It could be 100 years. You can do science to look at the reactor vessel. We can do science and figure out if it needs to be replaced.
So Michael Schneider argues that one of the main problems with nuclear, apart from its incredible cost, is the fact that as the fleet ages and as elements of it need to be replaced and repaired, it becomes far less reliable. I think he says that the French nuclear fleet is offline for about 80 days a year. That all has flow-on impacts.
He's so misleading. That's so deliberately misleading because I know that he understands what's going on in France, and that's not what's going on. So the record on nuclear is actually really clear. First of all, like any new technology, it took a while for these guys to figure out how to properly run these plants. So they were running like 50, 60% of the year when 3 Mile Island happened in 1979. After that, the industry took measures, the government took measures. In some ways, it sounds weird, but 3 Mile Island was great for the nuclear industry. They improved performance. It was often human factors, not fancy machines. And they took the average capacity factor up to like 92%, I think is what it was last year. Best way for nuclear plants to run them full out. The other 8% of the year is when they're refueling or doing maintenance. Okay, what Schneider is referring to is that France has so much nuclear that in order to deal with the difference in the seasonal loads, they operate their nuclear plants at much lower capacity factors. It's a function of French nuclear success, not nuclear failure, that the plants are
Sorry, can you repeat that last bit?
Yeah, so by the way, so France is 75% nuclear, more or less, right? A little bit less. So in order to, and in the United States, 20% as our electricity is nuclear. And so in order for the French grid, because at some seasons, I assume summer is more high energy, is using more energy in France, although I may be wrong, it might be winter. So one of those seasons, so don't quote me on that part. But basically you just have much higher demand during one of those seasons. So it means that if you're a heavy nuclear, you just are gonna run at lower capacity factors because you are gonna have a big part of the year where you just need to have nuclear plants offline. And that's when they're refueling, taking, doing maintenance.
Okay. Since you began your nuclear advocacy, the levelized cost of nuclear energy has continued to rise as far as I can see, and the cost of renewables has fallen a heap.
Not
Does
true.
that not challenge any of your assumptions?
It's not true. I mean,
Okay.
so I think you have to avoid cherry picking. You need to choose country level analyses over time. So you're not being like, oh, this one solar farm does this, or this one nuclear plant, whatever. That's what Schneider does, and it's misleading. France and Germany, right next to each other, two huge economies in this big experiment. France is sticking with mostly, it's actually not totally, but mostly nuclear. Germany's phasing out its nuclear, phasing up renewables. Germany's carbon intensity of its electricity is 10 times higher than France. 10 times. It's amazing. So Germans are 10 times more climate villains than the French on electricity. The French spend 1.7, I'm sorry, the Germans spend 1.7 times more for electricity than the French.
Is that not higher at the moment as it decommissions from nuclear and transitions to other sources?
Well, no, I mean, it's so the German electricity costs have increased like 50%. They're set to spend $580 billion. I mean, nobody disagrees that Germans have some of the most expensive electricity in Europe, and that it's because of the Energiewende. Now, can we easily disentangle how much of that is renewables and how much of it is the nuclear phase out? No, we can't. But we know that in California, our electricity prices.
You know, when you rebuild a grid, it costs. But you know, that's why we talk about levelized cost of power.
Well, so
and that is what Germany's in the middle of doing.
Yeah, but solar, so the high cost of solar and wind, I mean, there's multiple reasons. It's obviously much larger land requirements, much larger material throughput, 17 times more material throughput for solar than nuclear. But the big factor is the unreliability. So the University of Chicago, hiring a former Obama administration economist, Michael Greenstone, did an analysis and found that states that did, in the United States, states that did a lot of renewables, that had a renewable portfolio standard, saw very significant cost increases compared to states that didn't. And it's because the cost of managing all that unreliability is very high. I mean, the same thing is happening in Australia.
It is, but until you rebuild the grid.
Well, I mean, rebuild. I mean, it's like I mean, just to consider that the trend in energy and food and everything else in our lives has been towards dematerialization over 200 years. The energy we use is less material intensive. I mean, these things, these cell phones, you know, they've massively dematerialized, except now we're supposed to think, and that's been great for the environment. It's amazing. You're substituting energy for material, for matter. You're substituting energy for nature. Similar with plastic, by the way, substituting for sea turtle shells. So you get this substitution of energy for materials. But now when it comes to renewables, we're supposed to believe that making energy more material intensive, rematerializing energy is good for the environment.
But as you know, the cost and the energy intensity and the efficiency of renewables, it continues to decline. It does. It just does.
But it doesn't. It actually, what you're doing is that's misleading. Okay, and that's conflating. Okay, so the cost of solar panels is going down. True. But that's not all there is to it, because the inherent unreliability of renewables externalizes these additional costs onto the whole grid. And so when we see renewables heavy places, these are places that are spending a huge amount of money and all the things they have to do. So for example, just to give you one example, California has to pay Arizona, where more and more electricity is garbage electricity from renewables in California. You have to pay Arizona to take our electricity, because it's called, it causes what they call negative pricing, where you just are producing too much electricity when you don't need it. It's usually during sunny days when they're not too hot yet, because you don't need much air conditioning. You have too much solar energy, you got to go dump it on Arizona, or pay someone to take it. Same thing happens all over the country in terms of wind. I'm assuming there's some of that negative pricing in Australia. So that's so
yes,
renewables, to say that, so it's misleading to say, if I say, I bought solar panels and the electricity they produce is cheaper than the electricity a nuclear plant produces, is misleading, because the solar panels are not providing me electricity for most of the time. And that time I've got to be getting my electricity from somewhere else. And if it is indeed from solar and you're putting in batteries or something, your costs just go nuts, right?
No, but nobody I've spoken with who's looking at utility scale power argues that, firstly, you don't need new transmission cables and new storage options, but further, you don't need a grid that can exchange power. I mean, everyone knows this. The grid needs to change and grow. It needs to evolve.
But you
I
said
don't hear anyone arguing against
needs if it becomes a renewables grid. If Australia just did nuclear,
right. And you're saying if it did nuclear, that wouldn't need to happen because you could build a nuclear power plant at Bayswater, one at Liddell, one at Yallourn. They've already got cables there, so there you go. But nuclear doesn't have a social license to operate in Australia.
well,
And a nuclear
there
power
you
plant,
go. But that's because of, with all due respect, I think that's due to.
yeah, that's an absolutely fair argument. That could well be due to, well, not just due to media, but due to
Individually, I mean, you know what I mean, Nick.
to several. I know, but also due to several disasters. I mean, we can't pretend they didn't happen.
Well, no. In fact, in my book, I go into great detail on each of the disasters,
Yeah.
and I interview the best disaster expert. But I think here's just a short view. My view of nuclear is that it's such a radical. It's so radical. It's such a revolutionary invention. We're not going to have another one like it, until the aliens give us their, anti-gravity. I'm just joking. But it's a major revolutionary event of physics. Like 10,000 years from now, you'll be like that invention of nuclear. So it's so shocking. And it completely changes national security. It means North Korea is not worried about being attacked by the United States anymore. And that's a terrifying thing. And for countries that don't have the bomb, like Australia, like Germany, like Japan, I can't prove it, I find a lot of nervousness around nuclear. You would rather that it doesn't exist. We would rather it doesn't exist, not necessarily consciously. And so when you get to these events, and there was a whole generation of baby boomers that were traumatized by Hollywood and the US government itself, the duck and cover stuff. Australia had that book On the Beach was the big Australia book in the 60s. I'm born in 71. The day after was, I think, 1983. So I was 12 when the whole family was supposed to sit down and watch this movie about nuclear war. I mean, why was I anti-nuclear? That had a little bit to do with it. I mean,
do you stand by that essay on? Do you stand by that essay on nuclear weapons that caused some controversy a couple of years ago?
Absolutely, I stand by everything I've written. And
Right.
if I don't stand by it, by the way, I've criticized it. So where my views have changed, I have tried to be a serious person. And when I change my mind, I actually don't kind of mumble. I usually write about it and give a TED talk. So no, absolutely not. I mean, there's no all the political science community. It's funny. Michael's saying that nuclear weapons have not made the world more dangerous. It's so controversial. Well, I mean, is it? We're in one of the longest periods of peace since the 17th century. And you go interview political scientists. I mean, the whole field of international relations is built on this concept of deterrence. It's like gravity or power density. It's a core concept. So this idea that there's not deterrence is this wacky idea of anti-nuclear people who think that there's some other reason that India and Pakistan, India and China constrain their conflicts.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean, I just want to go giving out. I think some people have also caricatured my position. My position has never been, we're just going to go handing out these things on street corners. I think that what I was trying to say there, I was trying to do a couple of things, and I do it in the book too. I believe that the phobia around nuclear energy is not entirely, but significantly coming from fear of nuclear weapons. It's why people go, oh, God, nuclear, Well, I mean, are they really worried about 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, which hardly killed anybody? No, they're worried about, and those events themselves.
That's an interesting point. You said that when you did a COP talk with James Hansen, you said that Chernobyl killed 150 people or something like that.
In the book, I rely, by the way, on Geraldine Thomas, who runs the Chernobyl Tissue Bank at Imperial College London. She's a character. Yeah. And so, and she has walked me through all the information, all the data, and where she comes out is 200 deaths total over a lifetime after Chernobyl. And that is the World Health Organization. That is based on the IAEA.
So the IAEA and the World Health Organization figures that I saw say, yes, the figures are disputed, between 4,000 and 9,000 or 16,000.
Yes, and I go through that in the book. And
Okay.
that number is based on something called the linear no threshold. Oh, sorry, it's my dog. It's based on the linear no threshold. And I point out that linear no threshold, the idea is that any amount of radiation is harmful and contributes to, shortened life or disease. And it's been proven false. It's proven false by my home state of Colorado, where we have much higher elevated levels of radiation, mostly due to the granite and the rock, but also due to the higher elevation, higher altitude. And we have lower rates. We have longer life expectancy and lower rates of cancer. So it's disproven. And World Health Organization, it has that one statement, but it also had many, many reports, which I go through. I mean, they've done an absolutely terrible job of communicating to the public, which is why I wanted to write the book. And I wanted people to know who Jerry was and know that her mother died of leukemia. She's not some radiation, denier or something. And she works at Imperial College London, has never, ever worked for the industry. Totally credible source. She's relied on by BBC and others. You can look her up. So yeah, I just think the fact that the reaction to these events is so exaggerated, and I can't help but see fear of the bomb.
Depending on which data you take. The other thing is, imagine if your figure's right. Well, not imagine. Let's accept your figure as being right. Yeah. You've also got a multi-billion-dollar asset, which overnight became a multi-billion-dollar liability, and a large chunk of land that won't be used again in anyone's lifetimes or anyone's children's or descendants' lifetimes. And you've got a people traumatized and hundreds of thousands of people evacuated.
Traumatized, unnecessary. I mean, like in Fukushima, I talk about how they over-evacuate.
But they're all costs, are they not? The evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people is a real cost.
So are you going to blame the vaccines for anti-vaxxers?
I don't understand the connection.
No, but wait. So the people that don't take the vaccine because they are anti-vaxxers, they think it's going to cause autism. Is that the vaccine's fault? Is that the vaccine industry's fault? That people are irrational?
Obviously not.
Okay, so then why is it the fault of nuclear that people overreacted to Fukushima? I mean, like the government. I mean, because
you're saying that they. And I'm not arguing here. I'm trying to get this straight in my head. Right, the evacuations were unnecessary.
Not all of it, but it was too long and it was too much. People could have returned much sooner. And I point to this one of the most amazing studies, British Medical Journal, and they looked at the people that lived in one of the most contaminated areas that had the most fallout, the most radioactive particles in the soil. And they still had, they did internal dose measures, and they still had levels of radiation exposure far below the levels that we know to cause problems. So, and it's all in the book. It's all there. You don't have to believe me. You shouldn't believe me. You should look it up because it is shocking. And I don't mean to be. I told you my story about Chernobyl was it was Stuart Brand, and then it was just reading the World Health Organization reports and being like, even let's accept your number. Let's accept the 16,000 number. Let's accept
not my number.
Okay, let's accept.
I took it from the IEA's website today.
But let's say Greenpeace. Let's say Greenpeace is correct. 100,000 deaths. Well, okay, but air pollution contributes to 6 or 7 million deaths a year.
I would not argue that for a second.
No. I'm just saying. And James Hansen.
No, I take your point. I totally accept the cost of burning wood and coal. I totally accept that.
Yeah. And James Hansen.
And I think that it's been ignored for too long.
I was just saying that.
All right, look. Yeah. I'm glad we spoke. I don't know that I'll achieve more by taking more of your time. If I have follow-up questions, I'll email you. If you want to speak again, I'm happy to. I don't know what I'll write or if I'll write. I'm very happy to be criticized for my work. I hope you wait until I write it before you do have another crack at me.
I will, although I hope you can appreciate the experience of having those questions come at you and feeling like I can't win. I mean, if you sit there and you ask somebody outrageous questions and then they deny it, then it just kind of, it just all ends up reinforcing some sense of suspicion.
I do accept that. I reread the email today and I could have done it far more graciously. My only point is this: I just presume you have been engaged in a contentious debate for a long time. So I didn't approach you as I would someone who is not used to dealing with the media. I was perhaps far more blunt. But I do also think that it was perfectly reasonable for me to send you a series of those questions. It didn't mean I was I was backing those assertions.
Well, you know,
I'd
Nick, I'm glad you
probably,
said that. I think it's fair. I think that you've inspired me to acknowledge that I may have also been a bit sensitive, and I may have also overreacted. And if so, I'm sorry about that. You know, it's just last week was a kind of crazy period, and I'm super happy that you agreed to have this phone call with me. I love talking to everybody. You know, my mom is always like, people are always like, why would you go on these conservative shows? You're progressive. Why don't you go on Rachel Maddow or something? And I'm always like, I would love to go on those shows. I would love to be, they don't invite me, you know? And so I talk to whoever wants to talk to me. And I have always had the view that I want to talk to everybody. So anyway, I'm glad that we had a chance to chit chat, and I do hope you write something. And obviously if I don't agree, I'll write about it on Twitter or somewhere else.
yeah, fair enough. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Bye.